If you've ever watched Captain Kangaroo, The Electric Company, or America's Funniest Home Videos, you might just have seen an Aniform puppet on TV. Antubert Johnson saw an Aniform puppet on TV when he was a kid, and he made it his life's goal to figure out how to build one. This episode, I talked to Antubert about the history of the Aniform puppet and how he built one from scratch that he performs regularly on the YouTube show, The Live Test Show. My guest is Antubert Johnson on this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Well, Antubert Johnson, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Thank you very much, Grant. It's good to be here.
I'm very excited to talk to you because you just really are an inspiration because you work in this style of puppetry that I don't think a lot of people know about. And I'm very excited to kind of break it down a little bit with you. But I would like to start by asking, do you remember your first exposure to puppetry, the first time you saw puppets, either in person or on TV?
Yeah, I'm old enough to go back before Jim Henson really broke out. And so my first experience with puppets is probably the Captain Kangaroo show. And that's where I first saw an example of the Aniforms type of puppetry. And the only other puppets was something like, they had Mr. Moose, which was not very impressive. And they had of course, like Mr. Rogers was around, but those puppets were not articulated at all. So when I saw the Aniforms puppet, it certainly sparked something in me.
And that was Fred, right? That was the name of that character?
Yeah, I believe he was called Fred from Channel 1 or Fred on Channel 1. And there was actually, if I looked it up, I think there was only about half a dozen appearances throughout the run of Captain Kangaroo. But I watched Captain Kangaroo and waited for that to come on every time. For me, it was just such a special event.
Yeah. What do you think it was? I mean, we'll get into talking about the exacts of kind of what Aniform puppets are, but what do you think it was about Fred that impressed you?
It was the way he moved. It was definitely the way he bounced around. It was very squashy and stretchy, and it had an expression that just spoke to me. And I was young. I was probably about 7 years old or so. And I just wanted to have it or wanted to know about it. And at the time in New York City, this was done by a company called Aniforms. And way back then, it must have been the late 60s, they had a television commercial that would come on the local channel, and it was advertising Aniforms to be used as your advertisement. So the commercial was just a screen with an Aniforms character, and the Aniforms character would say, "Hey, you could use me for your products, and you can use me for your live events." And across the bottom was a 212 New York number. And I was so excited because I thought I could just buy one. And I was 7. I went to my father's shop in the Bronx, which I often did on a Saturday to get out of my mom's hair. And I remember using the old rotary phone there, standing on a little a stool and using the rotary phone to call that 212 number. And I really remember the conversation I had with the operator. And I said, yep, I would like one. She said, like what? I said, I want the Aniforms. I can, how much is it? She's like, no, I don't think you understand, ma'am. And I don't think I fully understood what it was, but that was the beginning of my quest to have an Aniforms puppet.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about you growing up, but just so we can kind of clue people in, could you tell us in your own words what an aniform puppet is, just so our listeners know?
Aniforms is a two-dimensional type of puppetry that appears as if it's a cartoon, an animated cartoon, and it was developed by a puppeteer named Maury Bunnin, who was he did other types of puppetry. He had, I think, the Houdini puppet, and he had other things going on. But this is a special process that he invented, and it kind of represents the magic of TV because it required a television camera in order to realize the process. So, early television from the 60s and this process kind of go hand in hand. It really is the magic of TV that brings the aniforms to life. And Maury, from my understanding, was very secretive about this process, and which made it very difficult to gain any information or insight into how he developed it or how it was done. So that's, I mean, the process itself is basically a two-dimensional character that's manipulated with the standard, rods and actuators. The key to it is the inverted image. So the I mean, I know they went off into doing it different ways, but traditionally or originally, it was all the background was all black, and the outline of the puppet was painted white. And when you invert that, like a negative image, the black background would turn white, so it would appear that it was a like a hand drawn cartoon on a white background, and
Right.
that's basically all the shadows of the actuators and rods were hidden in the background, and now you don't see them when it's inverted.
Right. And because I was thinking about this leading up to this interview, that it really is, like you said, a product of television, because other puppets you can perform on television, but this type of puppet you really can't perform without television. It kind of doesn't make sense if you just walk out onto a stage with this kind of puppet and do it.
That's right.
Yeah. And of course, we mentioned Fred from Captain Kangaroo, but there are a few other sort of notable aniform puppets that have been around. You and I both have talked about Barney's Army and that puppet, but there was also Lorelei the Chicken and this one from the game show, which was a pilot that was on YouTube. What do you think about these other aniforms out there, and did they sort of influence the development of Shecky?
It was very interesting, and again, they started using a chroma key version of a Shecky, which does have limitations in move. There's a trade off in the movement and getting a solid body. It's different from the background. So, but yes, anything aniforms, I was very interested in. In fact, there was a show, America's Funniest Videos, with can't I'm getting old and I can't think of his name. He was on that show with the two dads there, but he was the
Bob Saget?
yes, thank you. And once in a while, they would roll out an Aniforms character, and that was, you know, by how we're talking, fairly recently. And
Yeah.
I would get an email once in a while. Hey, was that you? And said, no, no, I wish it was.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting to come across these old clips on YouTube, and I think you and I were talking about this clip that on the Barney's Army YouTube channel, which I'll post a link to in the show notes as well. But there was just one clip of the puppeteer reaching in to adjust Barney, and to me, it was just like I wanted to study everything about that, just to be like, okay, you can kind of see how big this puppet was, and what is the puppeteer adjusting, and it's just really fascinating when you get these little glimpses behind the curtain.
It is. It really is. And that's pretty much been my life. Just trying to get a glimpse.
Well, going back to when you were a kid, did you? Because I know you've done radio and you've kind of done stand up. Did you always want to be a performer as a kid?
Yes, I have the eclectic type interests, but yes, it always involved performing. I fiddled with music for a while, and I always loved comedy. But this aniforms fire I had in me lasted through my childhood and my adolescence, and it really had nothing to do with my comedy career. But then they sort of merged when I just like I said, this never went away. This desire to learn about it, and even when the internet first came out, and I had like a Commodore 64 with before it was AOL, it was I forget what they called it,
The
Quantum
comp.
Link, you know.
Yeah.
And the first things I would search for is aniforms and any information. And one day it just sort of came to me. I don't know if it was a metaphysical event or if it was just my brain finally solving the problem after all these years, but it really just came in a snap. And I said, oh, it was really a light bulb moment. And I immediately, and I was probably in my mid 20s at this point, and I just lived in an apartment. I just started rummaging around like Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters. We'll grab this mouse pad, grab this paper towel holder, which is actually still in use in this version of Shecky. And I just started p- putting things together until I had something that I could then improve upon. But the biggest thing was what type of material was the puppet, what was the actual body of the puppet, which I believe that they originally used like a closed cell foam rubber, which was cut out. That wasn't really available to me, and I didn't really have the ability to get it. But I tried all different things. The problem was nothing would have that springiness I was looking for. Eventually, after a few iterations, I had some experience with mold making and casting. So I decided to make the shape out of clay. I made a plaster cast, and then I used a latex rubber to to form the body, and that's what I've stuck with. And this version I have now lasted 25 years, with still got some spring in them.
Yeah. What you said you had experience with mold making and stuff. Was that something you went to school for, or was that something you just was a hobby, or?
Yeah, that was a hobby. Yeah,
Yeah.
I went to school for a lot of things which all became obsolete. It's weird, like optical printing. I could tell you anything you want to know, but you would never need to know it. Or I went to school for audio engineering back in the old days, with when you used analog equipment and you had to splice tape with a razor blade. Print business, stripping negatives, which is all done in the computer. So there's not too much I know now that's not obsolete.
Well, except for this aniforms thing, which you are, I believe, the sole practitioner of. Did you have any sort of training in? Because I know, like when you were on radio, you did a lot of characters and things. Did you have any sort of acting training or improv training or anything like that, or was it all just kind of going out there and doing it?
Yeah, no formal training. I kind of fell into working at a talent agency when I was in my late 20s. And I was working in retail stores. I was selling stereos at Crazy Eddie's and stuff. And there was an old woman who used to come in who really took a liking to me. And she said she was a famous actress, actually. She was in that movie about Kellogg's cereal guy.
Oh yeah, the road to Wellville.
Yeah,
That one?
her
Yeah.
name was Jane Scott Moss. I I don't even know if she's alive anymore, but she was like a typical older lady. And she said, "Oh, would you please do me a favor and take my job? I can't stand it anymore." And she was answering the phones at a talent agency in Peekskill, New York. And I said, okay. So I started booking comics and booking comedy clubs. You know, we had comics and we had comedy clubs that we worked for, and we sort of matched up the talent. And after doing this for a while, that's when I gave Jimmy Fallon his first job. I picked his tape out of a pile and thought he was pretty good, pretty funny. So we gave him his first hosting job at the Laughing Wolf Comedy Club in New Paltz. And then I started. The fellow who ran that club took a liking to me, and I started running the show there. And you're seeing three comics a weekend doing three shows for years and years, and it's training by just being around it. You start learning the beats of comedy and the setup punch and what audiences like and what they don't like. And that's my training, basically, is just being in it.
And then you started doing stand-up yourself, right?
Right. And coincidentally, it wasn't. So this was happening parallel to my development of Shecky. And then when I thought Shecky was roadworthy enough, I brought him to one of my comic friends, a fellow by the name of Jim McHugh, really one of the only really genuine nice guys I found in the comedy business. He runs the Boston Comedy Festival. And I brought it to him, and I showed him, and he says, "Yeah, I think we could do something with this." So he brought me on the road with him, and we opened for Chong and Webster, Emmanuel Lewis, and Mark Skippy Price, and I did some of that before eventually I landed a permanent hosting gig at a small coffee house type comedy club in the city in Manhattan. And I did that for several years before I decided to open my own comedy club where I could just put everything I know together into one location.
Right. And when you say you were hosting as Shecky, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I would love to talk about like where did the idea, like you wanted to build an Aniform puppet, and before you started building it, did you have this idea for this character of Shecky, or did that come during the building of it, or where did Shecky come from?
The name Shecky?
Well, well, and the character, like where did this character of this little guy named Shecky, where did that come from?
It spoke to me, after it was in a certain stage of development, and then it just sort of takes a life of its own. And that life was named Shecky. And, at first at first he was a little nervous on stage, but after a while he became quite a character. And, yeah, it was just an evolution, nothing specific. I didn't have any grand plans. Even when I was making him, I didn't, or developing it, I didn't really have plans. It just kind of hit me that, hey, maybe I could bring this on stage and it would actually work. It was a technical nightmare to do that because you have to bring up the puppet and a stand for the puppet and a video camera that faces the puppet and lighting that could only be seen by the camera but not by the audience, and a shroud for the whole setup, and a big enough TV so that you could put it on the stage and people could see it, and transmitting equipment to get your video signal from where you're hidden behind the stage to the stage. And this would all fit in the back of an old Subaru. And yeah, it was cumbersome, but I didn't mind because it was just such a joy to be able to do this in front of people.
Now, like I did guitar comedy for years, and I know that when I would walk into some venues with my guitar, the other comics and sometimes the owners, they just roll their eyes. They're like, oh, here comes a guitar comic. And I know it's kind of the same with prop comics too. You know, I mean, Carrot Top gets a bad rap, but did you face this same sort of thing where you're hauling in a TV and you're the puppet and everything?
Absolutely, mostly. I did, at the coffee house, it was a little more intimate. It didn't have that many people, but it was a place where a lot of up and coming comics would come and work out their material. So most of my interest came from, the fellow with the dog that says poop. Robert Schmeigel would
Oh,
come
right.
and want to peek behind the shroud, and Gaffigan, what's that fella there, and I can't remember all their names. The guy with the big mutton chops, what was his name? But they would have an interest, and they would talk to me on the side about it. But generally, yes, I did get that, like a lot of eye rolling and, oh, what are you doing? And then at one point I had on the, I would bring like a 27-inch TV on the stage, and then I had a shroud around it to make it look like a cartoon version of an old TV, with the non-symmetrical Gumby type head to it, and I would slap that on, and people would just be shaking their heads like, "Oh, what is this?"
Oh, but I don't know if that's the way I was in comedy, so I get it, and that was my life. So,
Hey,
uh,
as long as did you do song parodies?
a couple. I mostly did originals.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think the thing with with Shecky and with guitar comics and what that is like, the other comics may roll their eyes, but when you get out on stage and people are laughing, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's like you're
Yeah.
entertaining, and that's your job. Your job is to entertain everybody.
Right. I agree. I've met a lot of comics. Lenny Schultz is a prop comic who's insane, and it didn't matter. That he's who taught me a lot of things about comedy. He was an old timer, but I mean he literally had 3 cases, like big suitcases of just toys and old things and squirty things, and he'd make a mess of the stage. But I just saw how in love he was with it, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter what other people said. The audience loved it, and he loved doing it, and that's all that really mattered.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, we were talking before we started recording here that you were saying how to really get the full motion out of an aniform puppet, you kind of do need an assist. And so, did you ever have an assist while you were performing live?
I did. I did a couple of talent shows where I really wanted to impress the people, and I did the fella, a fella named Tony, who was working with me at a comedy club that I owned. He kind of got what I was doing, and he would work the arms because you need 2 hands to work the mouth actuator, and there's a separate parallel actuator for the eye blink and the head motion, and they work sometimes together or across, but you do need the 2 hands for that. So unless you're going to let go of one to move an arm, it's really helpful to have another set of hands in there working the arms.
And did you, when you were performing live, like at comedy clubs, did you have a monitor that you could keep an eye on to see how he looked, or was it all just instinct? Or
No, so I would situate myself facing the stage, but behind the audience.
got it?
So I can, which is important because you need to, uh, the most important thing about being on stage with an Aniforms puppet is you want people to know that this is not a pre-recorded cartoon. So you would look at what people are wearing, and you would make the puppet look in that direction and say, "Oh my God, look at you! What did a clown throw up on you? What is that shirt?" But you'd be able to interact with the audience that way.
Right. And I bet I just Because these days in, I think Disney parks, they have these computer generated characters that can interact with the audience. There's a couple shows like that at Walt Disney World and out at Disneyland. And once people realize it's live, it kind of blows their mind.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays I think people understand that there is you can do live animation through tracking, and everybody's got a face filter they could put on their TikTok or Snapchat, and I think it's a little bit more people can connect the dots. But back in the day, and even in the early part of when I was doing it, there nothing really existed to do that. So it was really like a magic trick. It was,
Yeah.
there was some people in the early days that would come up to me and after a show and say, what type of software do you use for that? Like they haven't invented any software that could do this yet.
Yeah. Well, even nowadays, I mean, if you watch a Shecky, which we'll get into here in a second, where people can see Shecky, but if you watch, an old video of an Aniform, or you watch Shecky today, there is a very live puppetry type movement to it that is not computer generated. Like you can, if you're looking at it, you go, wait, this is a puppet.
Yeah, to me, I haven't really seen. I mean, you could do anything with computers. I guess nobody actually programmed it yet, but just the squash and stretch and there's no real, I can't articulate it, but there's a certain movement in an Aniform's puppet when done properly that you just can't match with anything else. It's a very analog feel, and it has its limitations, but I just haven't found a digital equivalent actually.
Well, if you want to, let's talk about, you just mentioned limitations. What are the limitations of this Aniform puppet?
Well, it is two-dimensional. The puppet itself is two-dimensional. So it is kind of an illusion when you want it to look left or look stage left or look stage right. There's very subtle design elements that you include so that it all makes sense. And it's a lot of it I learned just from trial and error. But for instance, the mouth section of the puppet pretty much is stationary. It you can move it from left to right, but that moves the entire body. Whereas the eyes are on a separate rig, and those are pivoted towards the top of the head. So if you move the eyes, you it would give the illusion that the head is turning three-quarter left or three-quarter right. However, if you don't design the mouth correctly, it would look awkward. So, you ever notice when Fred Flintstone, you're getting a profile or a three-quarter shot of Fred Flintstone, you kind of see there's a line that comes down from his nose and then curves around to make his mouth. So actually, if you design the mouth to look that way from the front, sometimes he looks like he has a weird smile, but that's designed on that way on purpose. So when you go left or right, it completes that design image. It's kind of hard to explain verbally, but speaking of the mouth, I did include a way to downturn Shecky's smile into a frown, which is a very I don't even know how I figured it out, but the edges of the mouth are sort of like a silicone string, and they're on these little wheels that are controlled by rods. And when you push them down, it turns the wheel. It rotates the wheel, so you can it's. I don't do it often, but it's available there on the Shecky puppet.
Yeah. I thought of this that I meant to ask you back when we were talking about you building it. But when you were building Shecky, was there any information available? We've talked, you and I have talked off air about like, oh, nowadays you can see a copy of the patent online. that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. But was there anything, or were you just going from things you saw on TV and working it out that way?
Yeah, that's it. There, and I've since searched for it, but there was an episode of What's My Line? That was an old game show where a fellow would come out, the celebrity panelists would be blindfolded, and they would ask a series of questions, kind of like 21 questions, and they would guess what the profession of the contestant was. And in one case, it was an Aniforms animator. And at the very end, for just about maybe 40 seconds or so, they showed you the setup, but they didn't really focus on it. And I kind of saw that it was a board that was on a 45-degree angle, and there was the controls were from the top, but mainly they just showed you the output, which was then inverted, that the panelists did see. And that was really all I had to go on. This was before I found any patents online. I didn't really, like I just would watch, and I couldn't even really, I'd never really found a video of Fred until recently. So it was just remembering what I thought it looked like, and then how to, I would grab a Pez dispenser that had a spring in it, and I'd say, okay, that could be the mouth, and I'd stick it on a stick, and I would just, try everything. And then, I guess because of, we talked about the limitations of the process. I mean, I guess you just wind up in the same spot. I believe what I have now is not far from the original design.
Right. And we, unfortunately, at least to now, will never know what that original design was because he was so secretive about it. And there's even, places on the internet where they say when people hired these aniform things, they had to be covered with a blanket in between takes and stuff. So he was so super secretive with it.
Right. And in the civilian world, when people ask me about it, I'd love to talk about it because I think it's one of my great achievements in life. But I kind of respect that the inventor of it, even though he's passed on and the patents have passed on, but I feel some sort of allegiance to just not, how to make a YouTube video, how to make an aniforms. I
Right.
just there's some reverence there to it, so I don't. And also, in a way, it's like a magic trick. Maybe once you know how it's done, you don't get the same joy from it.
Right. And also, I mean, you you basically built it from scratch, so there's, it's a little bit, I don't know. I think if I did it, I'd be like, yeah, you go figure out how to build it from scratch.
Yeah, there was a fella. He saw he saw a video I had on Facebook, and this is going back maybe 5 or 6 years, and he was very interested in it, and he wanted me to take pictures of the puppet. And at that time in my life, I had already put Shecky in the closet and never really had any dreams of doing anything else with him. And at that moment, I was ready to give it away. I was ready to say, "Here, you want to be the caretaker of this technology? That's great." So he said, "Could you take pictures of the puppet?" And I took some pictures, and then he wrote back, "Well, could you take the eyes apart so I can look at the eye blink mechanism?" And then I'm like, well, look, I'll tell you what. You come over to my house, and we'll have a barbecue. I'll make you a burger, and we'll sit around. I will explain everything, and I'll give you the puppet." And he says, he come back and he said, "No, I wouldn't really want to do that. But if you could send pictures of the deconstructed puppet," and I just thought, this was, I hate to say it's my life's work, but it's because it's so dumb. But it is basically my life's work. So I declined and I said no. But and then it's a good thing because a few years later I decided to bring him on YouTube in some form.
Yeah, well, let's. I'm glad you didn't give him away too, because I may never have discovered him. But Shecky's main performance venue now is, as you say, YouTube, and he's on a show called The Live Test Show. Can you tell us a bit about this show and where you came up with the idea for it?
Well, the live test show is actually my it was my internet radio show's name. So way back after, well, I opened the comedy club, and then my opening day on for the comedy club was September 7th, 2001, and I was in New York. So I had one good weekend, and then they parked the airplanes in the buildings, and nobody wanted to see comedy anymore for a long time. So needless to say, my business went belly up after a few months, after 7 months. So I left the comedy world. I was disappointed. And I took a job in the real world, working in a factory type setting, doing something. And, but, I have that creative thing. So I guess this was early 2000s. I started a internet radio show, which was very early. And it was called I didn't know what to call it. And I wanted to test it out. So I called it the Live Test Show. And I had my format was sort of like a late night talk show, but just the audio version. And I would have the canned laughter and applause, and I'd have an announcer opening, which was me. And I actually did that for several years, and had some mild notoriety in Talkers Magazine, Frontier 50 for a few years. And during this time on the air, I met my wife and I got married, and then I started having children. And then once you have children, you don't really want to go up to the attic and do a radio show, so that happened. And then, now the kids are self-sufficient, and I come back to it and realize that nobody's really listening to internet radio too much anymore, not the same way. So I see a lot of people are doing things on YouTube. And of course, I think of Shecky, again, integrating Shecky in with what I want to do. And I just sort of tried to make a video version of what the live test show radio show was. And, the biggest hurdle I'm still trying to overcome is on the live test show, I was the host. And if I'm doing Shecky, I can't be the host. I'm the sidekick. So I have to find, it's been a process of finding somebody that I can work with that understands what I want to do, and is a good replacement for me. But and I've gotten pretty close. I'm pretty happy with it's not a legitimate show yet. It's still in the testing phases, I guess I'd say. But I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it allows me to show Shecky to the world, or to the 20 people who look at it, and it's fun, and that's the most important thing with any of my endeavors. It's got to be fun to do, or else it's not. There's no point in it for me.
Well, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to, your channels so people can check it out, because it was inspiring to me when I first stumbled across it. And I think it was because maybe a post you had posted in a puppetry group on Facebook or something, because just as someone who has done live streaming, just the technical end of it is, you're filming in one location. Your host is usually in another location filming themselves over the internet. And then you put all of you together on this set, this Tonight Show set, and you're doing different camera angles and you're cutting to different things. And it's just really technically amazing. And what what I would love to know is, because not only are you working Shecky during the show, but you're doing all like the camera angles and the cuts and all that during the live show, right?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
real challenge. It's a challenge in dexterity and sanity. And I feel bad for Shecky because I'm not giving him 100% of my attention while I'm performing him, but I have to take my hands away to switch the camera angle or to play the video feed. I'm also doing the voiceovers live, and and I'm doing the audio, and I'm taking the calls if there's a caller to the show, and I'm bringing them in. So there's a lot going on in my mind and with my hands. So Shecky kind of gets the short end of the stick, and he says like, "Hey, I thought this show was about me," but yeah, unfortunately, there's only so many things I can do. And the host, like you said, is usually brought in on Skype and just basically sits there and is the host. So I'm doing everything else. I, I
Yeah.
I haven't found a better way yet, but I'm always searching.
We all need that free intern who will just
Yeah,
just do it. You also on the show occasionally perform a couple other puppets. Like last year, you had a coronavirus puppet and Alfred Hitchcock puppet,
yeah.
and all of these puppets they seem to be sort of on a smaller scale because like it's almost like in camera. I want to say tricks, but like built for the camera and scaled towards the camera.
Yeah, well, another one of my loves growing up was the Jerry Anderson puppets from Thunderbirds. I was always fascinating with that little lower lip moving like that, and if I always had dreams of being able to do that. But I also like miniature things. I do like things that are small, and for like I had a character Jimmy Fallon, which was a take on Jimmy Fallon, and I literally made a miniature Thunderbirds. He had a 3D printed solid head, and I made the tiny little mechanism in his mouth to be exactly like the way Jerry Anderson did it on the Thunderbirds, but quite like maybe a little above my technical skills. But I didn't care because I'm not really fond of Jimmy Fallon, so if it looked really funky, I didn't mind. If you looked. But yeah, the Alfred Hitchcock was a a silicone version of that where I would I 3D printed a mold and then used a silicone with a little actuator inside of it, and the coronavirus puppet was literally just one of my kids' toys turned inside out with one of her hair clips as the mouth actuator. But you can hide a lot of things on green screen. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do like things in small scale. You're right.
Yeah, yeah, it's really great, and I hope people check it out. What has been your experience sort of building a YouTube channel, from the ground up and trying to get these shows out there?
Well, so luckily, many, many years ago, like when YouTube was pretty young, maybe 2006, I had created a short, you want to say animation, it's just some still cartoon pictures for my comedy club when it opened. So at the time, I had a relationship with the local morning radio show, and they had a fella who did song parodies and stuff. So I was had a relationship with him, and the morning show host suggested that I make a some sort of an animation to go along with a song called "The Farmer's Daughter." It's like it's kind of a naughty song, but it's not. It's kind of childish. But I drew some pictures on a notepad, and then I scanned them in the computer, and then I used like a trial version of Adobe Premiere to reveal the thing that wasn't really naughty, and I just threw it up on YouTube just as a goof, and I didn't pay much attention to it, but then, I started getting emails from YouTube saying, since your video received over 1 million views, and I said, what? And then I go back on YouTube. I had to remember my password, and I see that at some point in the early stages of videos becoming viral, it went viral. And because of that, I had, I don't know, about 1,200 subscribers that I didn't really, work for or anything. They were just there. So when I started doing the live test show, I kind of had that built in just from this ancient naughty cartoon I put up 15 years ago. So yeah, I didn't really have to build the subscribers from scratch. Because I think I don't know, I'm not sure about this, but I think YouTube has you have to have so many subscribers in order to do a live stream, or I don't know how it works, but I had already had that from the Farmer's Daughter video.
Excellent. Well, I hope people, again, I will put the link in the show notes. So I hope people go check it out, because it's a great show. It's a fun show. And, I'm always tuned in if you guys are on. Do you think the way technology has advanced, would performing Shecky live be easier now because, for instance, TVs are lighter? Or, is it easier to do now, or is it more complicated to if you were going to do this live?
Oh, I think it would be a lot easier. Probably less impressive because of how we talked about people are more used to seeing, outlandish things, maybe, video tracking or facial recognition tracking. And so maybe it wouldn't be as impressive. But yes, much easier, lighter TVs for sure. And transport mechanisms to get video onto something through digital means, and even the cameras themselves are much better now. I had like an old one of those giant camcorders that luckily had a negative setting, for image negative, but it was giant and heavy. But yeah, now you could just do it with a little camera and some software.
Yeah. Have you ever performed? I mean, I know we talked to you. You've done a couple other puppets on the live test show, but have you ever done any puppets like, hand and rod Muppet style puppets or marionettes, or has it basically been the aniforms?
Yeah, just the aniforms. But I always loved the hand puppet. I was a big fan of Jim Henson. I was way too old to be watching Sesame Street, but I did because of the great puppet work. And when I was a kid, I used to cut up, foam. I remember once I was taking the school bus home, and one of the bad vandal kids had cut one of the seats open, and there was just all this foam in there that was falling out, and I just swiped a piece of a big chunk of square foam, and I brought it home, and I was taking a scissor and making a head and then figuring out how to move it. So I was always interested, but I haven't performed in any professional capacity that way. But I love it, and I would love to.
Yeah. As we wrap up here, I always like to ask, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
It was probably, I'd say, opening for Chong, and having Chong come out and interact with Shecky. That probably was I guess, most notable or highlight of my career. And because I grew up watching Cheech and Chong movies, and here I am on stage with him, or Shecky anyway. So that was probably the top of my career wise.
Excellent. I just want to just thank you again for taking the time to be on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and I just want to say, I've known a lot of people in show business, and you are by far one of the most genuine, gracious, and interesting, as well as talented people I've ever run across. And I really do give you a lot of credit for all you do, and how you maintain such a great attitude and personality in life. I really give you a lot of credit.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks again to Antubert Johnson for being on the show. For links to some of the things we discussed on the show, check out the show notes for this episode, episode number 64, over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my talk with Antubert Johnson, download the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android and click on the gift icon in the listing for this episode. Well, now it's time to announce the winner of episode 63's giveaway for a brand new puppet deck, courtesy of puppetdeck.com. The question was, who helped Colleen Smith perfect her accent for her role in the Happy Time Murders? And the answer was Louise Gold. And the winner is Kevin Meister. Congratulations, Kevin. Your puppet deck is on the way. Many thanks to puppetdeck.com for donating a puppet deck for this giveaway. This episode, we are giving away a $100 digital gift card to projectpuppet.com, courtesy of Under the Puppet and projectpuppet.com. ProjectPuppet.com offers DIY puppet patterns, hard-to-find building supplies, and custom puppet design and construction services. To be entered to win this $100 gift card, all you have to do is answer this question from the episode you just heard. Who is the inventor of the Aniform puppet? When you find the answer, send it in an email to underthepuppet@gmail.com with the subject line giveaway, and you'll be entered to win. All entries for this giveaway must be received by October 15th, 2021. The winner will be chosen at random from all correct entries and be announced on the November 1st, 2021 episode of the show. One entry per household. Good luck. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. I want to send a special thank you out to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who help make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level who get a special shout out are Vicky Sebring, David Akers, Tony Urbano, Kathy Crawford, Eve Cunning, and my great aunt Dorothy Pachoco. To become a patron and help support this show, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. If you have questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, call our voicemail line at 818-806-9604. Or click the Call the Show button in the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. You can also send your feedback via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Twitter by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you next time. This episode of Under the Puppet was edited by Steven Staver and features music by Dan Ring. Under the Puppet is a production of Saturday Morning Media and is made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons. Become a patron today at patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. And help spread the word by sharing your favorite Under the Puppet episode with a friend. Under the Puppet is copyright 2021 Saturday Morning Media Grant Pachoco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.